The courtroom was already full when the doors opened that morning. The air inside felt thick, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The people in the benches spoke in low voices, their eyes turning every time the door creaked. Some came out of curiosity, some out of anger, and a few because they wanted to see justice being done with their own eyes. In the middle row sat the family of the man on trial. They looked tired and worried, their hands clutching each other's tightly. Every sound in the courtroom made them flinch a little. Across the room, the victim's relatives sat quietly, faces still from holding in too much pain. Between them was a wall of silence so heavy that even the shuffling of papers seemed loud. At the front, the judge was already seated, his expression calm but serious. The sound of the wooden gavel broke through the noise and everyone straightened up. The trial that had divided the whole town for months was about to begin. On the defense side stood a young lawyer who looked both nervous and determined. He wasn't famous, and this was the biggest case he had ever handled. Yet there was something in his eyes, a mix of focus and quiet belief, that made some people in the audience whisper that maybe, just maybe, he might turn things around. His client sat beside him, silent, his eyes fixed on the table. He had been accused of something serious, something that had made half the town hate him. The other half wasn't sure what to believe. Some said he was guilty beyond doubt. Others said things didn't add up. As the trial began, the prosecutor stood up first. He was confident and experienced, the kind of man who knew how to make every word sound powerful. He started by describing the victim, the night of the crime, and the evidence that pointed straight to the man sitting at the defense table. His voice filled the room, steady and strong. The lawyer listened carefully, taking notes, his pen moving quickly. Every few seconds he glanced at his client as if to reassure him without words. When the prosecutor finished, he sat down, satisfied. It seemed like an open and shut case. Then it was the defense's turn. The young lawyer stood, adjusted his tie, and walked to the center of the courtroom. For a moment he didn't say anything. The silence stretched, and even the judge looked up from his notes. Then in a calm voice, the lawyer said, "Your Honor, the truth of this case is not what it seems." A few people in the crowd shifted in their seats. The lawyer began to tell the court that sometimes what looks clear isn't always true. He didn't shout or make dramatic gestures. He simply spoke like someone trying to make others understand something deeply important. He talked about how evidence could be misunderstood, how people could make mistakes when emotions ran high, and how truth often hides beneath layers of assumption. The judge listened quietly. The prosecutor watched with a small smile, as if amused. The lawyer's words were careful, his tone respectful. He knew this was just the beginning. When the first witness was called, everyone leaned forward. It was a man who said he saw the accused near the scene that night. He spoke confidently, saying he was sure of what he had seen. The prosecutor nodded proudly, letting his witness take the spotlight. But when it was the defense lawyer's turn to ask questions, the energy in the room changed. He walked slowly toward the witness, his expression calm. "You said you saw my client clearly?" he asked. "Yes," the witness replied firmly. "And it was dark that night, wasn't it?" "Not too dark," the witness said quickly. "There were streetlights?" "Yes, were they working?" The man hesitated. I think so. You think so?" "I didn't check each one," the witness admitted. The lawyer nodded gently. "Of course not. You had no reason to." He paused for a second. "But you're sure it was my client you saw?" "Yes." "How far away were you?" "Maybe 25 feet. The lawyer tilted his head slightly. "And what were you doing at that time?" "I was walking home. Were you in a hurry?" The witness frowned. "I suppose I was. It was late." The lawyer gave a small smile. "So it was late, somewhat dark, and you were walking home quickly. Yet you're sure you recognized my client?" The courtroom grew quiet. The witness shifted uncomfortably. I believe so." The lawyer didn't press further. He thanked the man and sat down. The prosecutor looked annoyed. The judge made a note. The people watching started whispering again. As the trial went on, more witnesses came and went. Some spoke confidently, others stumbled. The lawyer kept noticing small things, details that didn't fit perfectly, statements that contradicted earlier ones. He didn't yet have proof of anything, but he could feel that something wasn't right. At night, after each day in court, he stayed late at his small office, going through every piece of evidence again and again. He stared at photographs, timelines, and written statements looking for a pattern, a hidden truth. His friends told him to rest, but he couldn't. There was something about this case that kept pulling at him, something that whispered that the truth was buried just beneath the surface. The next morning, the prosecution called another witness, a woman who claimed she had heard the accused arguing with the victim the night before the crime. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and tears filled her eyes. The prosecutor guided her carefully, painting a picture that made the accused look guilty. When it was time for cross-examination, the defense lawyer stood up again. He didn't attack or raise his voice. Instead, he spoke softly. "Ma'am," he said, "you said you heard them arguing that night." "Yes," she whispered. "From where?" "From my house. Through the window." "How far is your house from the victims?" "About 50 meters, maybe more." "And was your window open?" She nodded. "A little." He paused. "Was there music playing?" "A TV? Any noise?" She blinked, thinking. "My son was watching TV, but I still heard the voices." "You heard voices," the lawyer repeated. "But did you recognize them clearly?" She hesitated. "I think so." "You think it was my client?" Her voice grew softer. "I'm not sure now. I heard shouting, but—" She trailed off, looking down. The courtroom murmured again. The judge called for silence. The lawyer thanked her kindly and returned to his seat. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He was trying to get closer to what really happened. Bit by bit, he began to see a bigger picture forming, a picture that didn't match what everyone believed. After court, he walked out into the cool air, his mind spinning. Reporters called out questions, but he ignored them. He walked down the steps slowly, deep in thought. Somewhere inside all this noise, there was a single piece of truth waiting to be found. He just had to keep digging. That night, he visited the location where everything had happened. The street was quiet, only a few lights flickering in the distance. He stood near the spot described in court, looking around. From that point, he could barely see the house across the street. The shadows covered half the path, and the light poles stood far apart. He realized something. If it was this dark tonight, it would have been even darker on the night of the incident. He stood there for a long time, replaying the witness's words in his head. Could someone really have seen clearly from 25 feet away in dim light while walking fast? It didn't make sense. He walked further, looking for any camera that might have captured the night. Most were too old or broken. But one small shop had a camera pointed toward the street. He went inside, introduced himself politely, and asked if the footage still existed. The shopkeeper hesitated, saying it was from months ago, but the lawyer insisted it might be important. After some time, the shopkeeper agreed to check. The lawyer waited nervously, his heart beating faster than usual. A few minutes later, the man returned holding an old hard drive. "If it still works," he said, "you can look at it." The lawyer thanked him and left with it carefully in his hands. He knew he couldn't get too hopeful. It might show nothing, but he also knew he couldn't ignore any chance to uncover the truth. Back in his office, he played the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of silent video. Streetlights flickered, cars passed, and stray dogs wandered across the road. Then he paused. A figure appeared at the time the witness had mentioned. But the figure wasn't walking fast, it was running. And it didn't look like his client at all. He leaned closer to the screen, his breath caught. The image wasn't perfectly clear, but something about the build, the posture, even the direction of movement, it all seemed different. The person wasn't heading toward the scene. They were moving away from it. He sat back slowly, staring at the monitor. This was it, a small piece of truth that could change everything. But he couldn't be sure yet. He needed more. The next morning, he went to court with the same calm look on his face, but inside he carried a new determination. He knew he had just stepped onto a path that could lead to something big, something that could either set his client free or put himself in danger. And as he looked across the courtroom, seeing the judge, the prosecutor, and the crowd waiting for another ordinary day of trial, he couldn't help but think. None of them had any idea what truth was about to come their way. That morning, the courthouse buzzed louder than usual. The case had started to get attention beyond the town. People from nearby areas were now showing up just to watch. Reporters waited near the steps, their cameras ready. Everyone wanted to see how the young lawyer would handle what many called an impossible case. He arrived early, holding his worn leather briefcase, eyes half tired but sharp. He hadn't slept much the night before. The image from the shop's security camera still played in his mind. That shadowy figure running across the street had changed everything. It was the first thing that made sense in weeks. Inside the courtroom, the accused sat quietly, his face pale and drawn. He had stopped asking questions every few minutes like before. Now he only looked at his lawyer with quiet hope, the kind that breaks your heart because it's so small and fragile. The lawyer leaned over and whispered, "We're getting closer." The man nodded, gripping his hands together tightly. When the judge entered, the usual calm silence settled over the room. The trial resumed and the prosecutor began questioning another witness, a local police officer who had handled the initial investigation. His uniform was crisp, his answers confident. To the crowd, he sounded convincing, the kind of officer who seemed certain about everything he said. But the defense lawyer listened carefully, jotting small notes. Every word mattered now. The officer spoke about how the accused had been found near the crime scene that night. He described finding a personal item belonging to the victim close to where the accused had been standing. It sounded bad. It always had. When it was time for cross-examination, the lawyer stood up slowly, walking toward the witness stand with calm steps. "Officer," he began politely, "you mentioned you found that item near my client, correct?" "Yes, sir." "About 5 feet away. Did you see him holding it?" "No." "Did you see him touch it?" "No, but it was close enough to assume." The officer paused. "It's logical to think," the lawyer smiled faintly. "We're not here to think, officer. We're here to know." A few people chuckled quietly, earning a warning look from the judge. The lawyer continued, "Was the area secured immediately after you found the item?" "Yes, we did our best." "Did anyone else enter that area before it was sealed?" The officer hesitated. "A few people were already there. Neighbors mostly. So it's possible that item could have been moved before you arrived?" "I suppose that's possible." "Thank you." The lawyer returned to his seat, his mind already racing ahead. It wasn't proof yet, but it chipped away at the solid wall the prosecution had built. As the day went on, the tension in the courtroom thickened. The lawyer could feel the weight of every stare, some hopeful, some angry, some simply curious. He knew people wanted a clean story, one villain, one victim. But real life was rarely that simple. During lunch break, he sat alone on the courthouse steps eating a sandwich he barely tasted. His thoughts were on the video. He needed to verify it properly before presenting it. The footage was grainy, old, and partially damaged. If he showed it too early, it could be dismissed easily. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You really believe he's innocent, don't you?" He looked up to see one of the court clerks standing nearby holding some files. She had been there since the first day, quietly doing her work. "I don't know if he's innocent," he said honestly, "but I know the truth isn't what everyone thinks." She nodded slowly. "You've got that look, the one people get when they're too deep to walk away." He smiled a little. "Maybe, but I'll take the truth over peace any day." She gave him a kind look and went back inside. He watched her go, thinking how strange it was that some people could see things others couldn't. Small moments of honesty in a world full of noise. When the afternoon session began, the judge called for new evidence submissions. The prosecutor stood, declaring confidently that all major evidence had already been presented. The lawyer remained quiet, waiting. But before the session ended, he stood up. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "I have a request for additional review. I've obtained potential new footage from the area on the night of the incident. I need time to authenticate it." The prosecutor objected immediately, calling it a delay tactic. But the judge, sensing something in the lawyer's tone, allowed the request. "You have 48 hours, he said sternly. The lawyer nodded gratefully. He had 2 days to prove the footage was real and meaningful. 2 days that could change everything. That night, he drove straight to a friend who worked in digital forensics. The man was older, calm, and trusted. He looked at the footage for hours, enhancing, pausing, zooming in frame by frame. They sat together in silence, the only sound coming from the low hum of the computer. Finally, the expert leaned back. "You're right," he said softly. "That's not your client. The body shape, the stride, the build, it's different." The lawyer felt his heart pound. "Can you identify who it might be?" The man shook his head. "Not yet. The footage is too dark. But if you can get me the time logs from nearby cameras, I might be able to piece together a path." It was late, but the lawyer didn't care. He drove across town, requesting permission from a few store owners to check their old surveillance systems. Most said the footage was deleted or overwritten, but one small gas station had a camera that still worked. The attendant, half asleep, agreed to let him look. He scrolled through the old clips, eyes burning from fatigue. Then, there it was. A glimpse of a figure wearing a hood, matching the timing from the previous footage. The person wasn't running this time, they were getting into a dark-colored car parked nearby. He took a photo of the screen. The license plate wasn't visible, but it was a start. When he finally got back home, it was nearly dawn. He didn't even take off his jacket. He just sat down and stared at the evidence spread across his desk. Photos, notes, copies of witness statements, the video stills. Everything pointed to one conclusion. His client had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone else had used that night to hide their own tracks. The next day in court, the lawyer's calmness surprised everyone. Even the judge noticed. The prosecutor looked annoyed by his quiet confidence. During questioning, the defense began bringing up small, careful details. The streetlight that wasn't working properly. The missing camera at one corner. The conflicting witness times. Piece by piece, he started weaving doubt, not through emotion, but through logic. The prosecutor tried to interrupt several times, but the judge allowed the lawyer to continue. The atmosphere shifted. The audience, once certain of guilt, now leaned forward, unsure what to believe. At one point, the lawyer asked to recall a previous witness, the one who had claimed to see the accused near the scene. When the witness returned, the lawyer showed him a printed image from the footage. "Do you recognize this person?" The man squinted. "It's hard to tell." "Take your time," the lawyer said gently. After a moment, the witness admitted, "It doesn't really look like him. The height's different. The shoulders too," the lawyer nodded. "Thank you for being honest." He turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, I believe this warrants a deeper review of the evidence. What we've all been told might not be the full story." The judge frowned thoughtfully, glancing between both sides. "Continue," he said. The rest of the session continued under heavy silence. Even the sound of pages turning seemed loud. The young lawyer didn't yet reveal everything he had, but he knew the shift had begun. The crowd could feel it too. By the time the day ended, whispers filled the hallway again. People who once looked at the accused with anger now looked confused, uncertain. The lawyer walked past them quietly, heading toward his car. Outside, the evening sky was turning orange, and a soft wind blew through the street. He paused for a moment, looking back at the courthouse. He knew the truth was getting closer, but truth, he also knew, was dangerous. That night, he received a call. The voice on the other end was low and cautious. "You're digging in places you shouldn't," the caller said. "Be careful." He didn't recognize the voice, but the warning sent a chill through him. He hung up slowly, staring at the dark window. Maybe he had touched something that someone wanted buried, but it was too late to stop now. He turned off the lights, sat at his desk, and whispered to himself, "The truth is coming, whether they like it or not." The next morning came with a strange stillness. The sky was dull gray, and the courthouse steps were crowded before the doors even opened. Everyone could feel that something was changing in the case, though no one knew exactly what. People whispered about the lawyer's new evidence, the mysterious footage, and the way the prosecutor had looked unsettled the day before. The lawyer arrived looking calm, but tired. He hadn't slept again, spending most of the night reviewing every file, every small piece of information that could help connect the dots. The call he received still echoed in his mind. Someone was watching him, that much was clear. But he couldn't let fear get in the way now. Inside, his client sat waiting, hands clasped together tightly. When the lawyer walked in, their eyes met. No words were needed. There was quiet trust there now, built from all the effort and long nights. The courtroom filled quickly. The judge entered, and as soon as the session started, the prosecutor stood up with his usual confidence. "Your Honor," he said, "this case has dragged on long enough. The defense is trying to confuse the court with vague evidence and unclear video. It's time we return to the facts." The lawyer stood slowly. "With respect, Your Honor, the only confusion here is the one caused by ignoring what doesn't fit the easy version of the story. I believe there's more to this case than anyone expected." The judge leaned back slightly, watching both men. "Then show us," he said. The lawyer nodded. He took out a small flash drive from his pocket and handed it to the clerk. The room grew silent as the lights dimmed and the screen flickered to life. The footage from the old shop camera began to play. At first, it looked like nothing. Just a quiet street at night, shadows, a few cars passing. Then, at the timestamp he had marked, a figure appeared running across the road. The lawyer pointed. This was the same time one of the witnesses claimed to see my client near the scene. But as we can see, this person is moving away from it, and the build does not match my client's. The prosecutor stood up immediately. That footage is unclear, Your Honor. It could be anyone. The lawyer stayed calm. I agree. It could be anyone. That's exactly my point. The room stirred. People began whispering again, leaning toward one another, trying to make out the image on the screen. The judge called for silence. The lawyer continued. For months, everyone has assumed only one version of the story, the one that was easiest to believe. But this case has gaps, and we've been filling them with assumptions instead of facts. He paused, then added quietly, and the truth doesn't live in assumptions. The judge nodded slightly, a faint look of respect crossing his face. The prosecutor frowned but didn't interrupt again. When the session ended, reporters crowded near the courthouse steps, throwing questions in every direction. The lawyer ignored them and helped his client through the side door, away from the noise. They walked down the quiet street, neither speaking for a long time. Finally, the client said softly, "Do you really think they'll believe me now?" The lawyer looked at him. "They don't have to believe you yet," he said. "They just have to start doubting what they thought they knew." That night, he went back to his office and placed all his papers on the floor. It looked chaotic, but it made sense to him. He began tracing timelines again. What time the victim left home, when each witness claimed to have heard something, where each person said they were. As he drew lines between them, something clicked. He noticed that one witness, who had been very vocal at the start of the trial, had given two slightly different versions of their story. The first time, they mentioned hearing a car engine start right after the noise. The second time, they said they didn't hear any car at all. It was a small thing, but small things mattered. He pulled out the police report again. The victim's car had been found in a different location, about a mile away from where the incident took place, but no one had ever explained how it got there. He stared at the paper, his mind spinning. Someone must have driven it. The next morning, he requested the full evidence logs again. It took hours, but when he got them, he noticed something missing, a key that had been listed but never examined. It was from the victim's car, found weeks after the incident, but there was no follow-up test. He brought it up in court that afternoon. The prosecutor looked irritated, flipping through his own notes. "That's irrelevant," he said, but the lawyer pressed on. "A key found miles away untested from the victim's car is irrelevant?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "I'll allow it. Continue." The lawyer began asking the officer about the key, when and where it was found. Who discovered it? The officer hesitated. "It was turned in anonymously," he admitted. The courtroom went silent. "Anonymously?" the lawyer repeated. "Someone found it connected to the most publicized case in town and didn't leave a name?" The officer nodded uncomfortably. The lawyer turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, that's not something we can overlook. That means someone out there knew this car mattered and wanted to stay hidden." The prosecutor objected again, but the judge allowed the point to stand. After the session, the lawyer stepped outside, feeling the weight of both victory and pressure. He could sense the tension building around him. The more truth he uncovered, the more resistance he felt. That evening, while walking back to his car, he noticed a figure standing across the street, half hidden by the shadows. The person didn't move, just watched. The lawyer slowed, trying not to show alarm. When he blinked, the figure was gone. He wasn't sure if it was real or just his tired mind playing tricks, but it left him uneasy. He drove home carefully, checking his rearview mirror more than usual. Once home, he sat in darkness for a while, thinking. He had chosen this path because he believed in justice, but justice often came with a price. Later that night, His phone buzzed. It was a message from the digital expert he had visited earlier. It read, "Check the second video file. You missed something." Heart racing, he opened the file on his laptop. It was the same footage but slowed down and enhanced. The figure running across the road turned briefly toward the camera. The light hit their face for just half a second, but it was enough to reveal something surprising. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone familiar. Someone who had been sitting quietly in the courtroom all along. He froze. He replayed the clip several times, zooming in. The shape of the jawline, the way the person held their shoulders. It was clear now. He leaned back, his pulse quickening. If this was true, it would change everything. But he couldn't act yet. He needed to be sure. The next day in court, he said nothing about the discovery. He kept his expression calm, continuing with routine questioning. But every time his eyes met that familiar face in the courtroom, the one from the video, he felt a chill. That person smiled politely back at him, unaware that their secret had started to crack open. As the session ended, the lawyer gathered his papers and walked out. The judge announced that closing arguments would begin soon, but the lawyer knew something bigger was coming before that. He had one final move to make. That night, rain poured heavily outside his office window. He sat there, watching it hit the glass, his mind torn between fear and resolve. He knew what he had to do, but it wouldn't be easy. If he exposed the person he saw in that video, it wouldn't just shake the courtroom, it would shake the whole town. He picked up the phone and called the expert again. "Can you prepare that video for court presentation?" The man hesitated. "Are you sure? This could stir things up." "I'm sure," the lawyer said softly. "It's time the truth speaks for itself." He hung up, stared at the rain outside, and whispered, "Tomorrow, everything changes." The rain had stopped by morning, but the air still carried the smell of it. The courthouse looked quieter than usual, but everyone inside could feel the weight of what was coming. The young lawyer arrived early, carrying his files close to his chest. His steps were steady, but his heart wasn't. He knew that today was going to change everything, one way or another. The accused sat in his usual seat, head bowed, eyes heavy with exhaustion. It had been weeks since the trial began, and his hope had worn thin. When his lawyer walked in, he looked up, searching his face for some sign, any sign, that things might finally go his way. The lawyer gave a small nod. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Today the truth will speak." The judge entered and everyone stood. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fans. Reporters filled the back rows. Their cameras clicked softly, trying not to disturb the proceedings. The prosecutor sat tall and confident, pretending to look unbothered, though his eyes darted once or twice toward the defense table. The judge began. "We will now proceed with the presentation of new evidence submitted by the defense." Lawyer stood, buttoned his coat, and walked slowly toward the center. "Your Honor, before I show the new evidence, I want to remind this court of something important. Justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about truth. And sometimes, the truth takes time to come forward." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The lights dimmed slightly and the clerk set up the screen again. The lawyer took out the flash drive and handed it over. The same video played, the one that had caused so much talk earlier, but this time the lawyer had added something new. The footage was clearer, enhanced, and slowed down at a crucial point. The crowd leaned forward as the figure appeared again, running through the street. Then came the moment that changed everything. The faint turn of the head, the quick flash of light across a familiar face. The lawyer paused the video right there. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "this person is not my client. This person is someone who has been sitting here in this courtroom, watching every session." Gasps filled the room. The prosecutor stood up instantly. "Objection. This is outrageous. That footage could be anyone." But the lawyer didn't raise his voice. "It could be anyone," he said calmly. "But let's look closer." He pressed play again, and as the clip continued, he showed still frames, side by side. One of the figure in the video, and one taken during the trial. The same person, same build, same features, same jacket. The room went completely silent. The only sound was the faint buzz of the monitor. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. The lawyer continued, his voice steady. The person you see here has been part of this case from the beginning. They gave statements. They stood as a witness, and they pointed their finger at my client. All eyes turned toward one corner of the courtroom, where that very witness sat, pale and frozen, staring at the screen. The judge finally broke the silence. Is this true? The witness opened their mouth, but no words came out. Their hands trembled as they looked around, eyes darting between the judge, the lawyer, and the prosecutor. The lawyer took a slow breath. When I first heard this witness speak, something felt off. Their timing, their details, the way their story changed just slightly each time, and now this footage confirms what I feared. He turned toward the judge. Your Honor, I request this person be questioned immediately. The prosecutor protested again, his voice rising, but the judge overruled him. The bailiff escorted the witness to the stand. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint scrape of shoes on the floor. The lawyer approached, his tone gentle but firm. You were near the scene that night, weren't you? The witness hesitated. I don't remember. You told the court earlier that you saw my client there. I did. Then why? The lawyer said, pointing toward the screen. Were you the one running away? The witness froze. Their lips trembled. For a moment it seemed they might try to deny it, but the silence pressed too hard. Finally the words came out broken and low. I didn't mean for it to happen. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge slammed the gavel down, calling for order. The lawyer stepped back slightly, his heart pounding. The witness continued, voice shaking. It wasn't supposed to go that far. I just wanted to talk to him that night, to make him stop spreading lies about me. But he got angry. We fought, and then they stopped, covering their face with their hands. I panicked. I ran. I didn't know what to do. The accused looked stunned, his eyes wide. His family began crying quietly behind him. The judge's face was stern but calm. You understand what you are admitting? The witness nodded weakly, tears streaming down. I'm sorry, they whispered. The lawyer closed his eyes for a moment. It was over. The truth had finally come out, not in anger, but in its own quiet, undeniable way. The prosecutor sat frozen, unable to speak. For weeks he had built a case around certainty, and now, in just a few minutes, that certainty had collapsed completely. The judge called for a short recess while the officers escorted the witness away. The audience began whispering again, louder this time, disbelief, shock, and relief mixing in the air. The lawyer stayed seated, his hands clasped tightly. His client leaned over, voice breaking. You did it. You really did it. The lawyer shook his head. No, he said softly. The truth did it. When the court resumed, the judge's voice carried the calm weight of finality. Based on the confession made before this court and the evidence presented, all charges against the accused are hereby dismissed. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sound of quiet sobbing filled the room, the kind that comes from deep exhaustion, from months of fear finally ending. The lawyer turned to his client, who was crying silently. You're free, he said quietly. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. Reporters rushed forward as the doors opened, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. But the lawyer didn't speak. He simply guided his client past them, through the crowd toward the open street. They walked in silence. People turned to look at them, some smiling, some still in disbelief. The lawyer's mind felt blank. After so many days of tension, his thoughts were finally quiet. At the end of the street, the client stopped and looked back at the courthouse. I thought I'd never see this day, he said softly. The lawyer smiled faintly. Truth has a way of finding its way home, he said. Even if it takes time. The client nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. I'll never forget what you did for me. But the lawyer shook his head again. What I did, he said, was just listen to what no one else wanted to hear. They parted ways soon after. The client went to reunite with his family, who were waiting outside with tears and smiles. The lawyer stood there for a while, watching from a distance. The sound of laughter and crying mixed in the air, soft and genuine. He finally turned away and walked down the quiet street alone. The courthouse behind him seemed smaller now, like a place that had emptied itself of secrets. He could still hear the echo of the judge's voice, the confession, the crowd gasping, all blending together into one memory he would never forget. As he walked, a light wind brushed past, carrying the faint smell of rain and dust. He stopped for a moment, looking at the horizon. The sky was brighter now and the world felt a little lighter. He smiled to himself, not the smile of victory but of relief, because for him it was never about winning the case. It was about proving that truth, no matter how buried, still has a voice. And that morning, when the truth hit the courtroom, it didn't just change one man's life. It reminded everyone that silence can hide lies for a while, but not forever. Days passed after the courtroom confession, but the memory of that moment stayed fresh in everyone's mind. The case that once divided opinions had now become a story people whispered about in buses, cafes, and offices. Some talked about justice, others talked about luck. But for the man who had just walked free, it wasn't about either. It was about breathing again. He woke up the next morning without the sound of metal doors, without guards shouting, without the heavy air of the cell pressing on his chest. For the first time in months, he saw sunlight through his own window. It felt unreal. He stood there for a long time, just staring at it. His mother had made breakfast, but he barely touched it. She kept looking at him as if afraid he'd disappear again. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I knew you didn't do it," she said softly. "I told everyone, but nobody listened." He reached across the table and held her hand. "You never stopped believing," he said. "That's what kept me alive in there." His younger brother came in then, holding a newspaper with his picture on the front page. The headline read, "Truth Finally Revealed in Courtroom Shocker." He smiled faintly, but there was no joy in it, only quiet disbelief that his nightmare had turned into a public story. The lawyer had called earlier, checking on him. He didn't talk much, just asked if he was all right and told him to take things slow. "Freedom feels strange at first," the lawyer had said. "It takes time to remember how to live outside those walls." Later that afternoon, he stepped out alone. The air felt different, fresh but heavy with memories. Every corner of the street reminded him of something from before. Laughter, arguments, moments that seemed small back then but now felt precious. People recognized him, some stopping to offer kind words, others too shy to speak. He smiled politely, but inside a storm was still quieting down. The fear hadn't completely left him yet. Every time he heard footsteps behind him, he turned, expecting to see officers again. Every sound of a door closing made his heart jump. He walked until he reached the park near the courthouse. Children played, old men sat talking, and life went on as if nothing had changed. He sat on a bench and closed his eyes. The sound of laughter made him smile, but then a tear rolled down his cheek. He thought of all the nights in the cell, how he had counted cracks on the wall, replayed every moment of that day in his head, trying to understand why no one believed him. He had almost given up hope more than once. But somehow, something inside him had kept whispering that truth would come, and it did. Meanwhile, the lawyer sat in his small office downtown, staring at the piles of files on his desk. The victory felt different from what he'd imagined. There was no celebration, no applause, and just a quiet sense of peace. He had been in this field long enough to know that truth doesn't always win, that justice often bends under pressure, but this time it hadn't. He leaned back in his chair, remembering the look on the witness's face when the truth broke open. The silence that followed was still ringing in his ears. He had seen many cases in his life, but that moment, when truth stood taller than fear, was something he would never forget. A knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was the client. He stood there awkwardly, holding a small paper bag. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said quietly. "For everything," the lawyer smiled. "You don't have to thank me. You fought too." The man shook his head. "I was ready to give up." "You didn't." He placed the paper bag on the table. "It's just some homemade food. My mother insisted." The lawyer chuckled softly. "Tell her I'm grateful. She raised a strong son." They sat in silence for a while. Two people connected not by friendship but by something deeper. Truth, pain, and survival. Before leaving, the man turned at the door. "What happens now? For the one who confessed?" The lawyer sighed. "The law will take its course, But no matter what punishment comes, living with guilt is the hardest sentence of all. The man nodded, understanding more than words could say. He left quietly, the bell above the door jingling softly. That night he couldn't sleep. The world outside his window was peaceful, but inside him memories still echoed. He walked to the mirror and looked at himself, thinner, older, but stronger somehow. He whispered, "It's over." But then he realized something. It wasn't really over. Freedom came with a new kind of weight, the question of what to do now. He decided to go back to work a few weeks later. His old boss welcomed him with a handshake and a nervous smile. "People make mistakes," the boss said, avoiding his eyes. "Glad you're back. Not everyone was kind." Some people still whispered. Some crossed the street when they saw him, but he didn't let it break him this time. He had seen worse. He had lived through something that had crushed others. He wasn't going to let rumors ruin what truth had finally given back. The lawyer visited the courthouse again one afternoon for another case. As he walked through the hallway, a clerk stopped him and said, "That last case you handled, people still talk about it. You made everyone remember why we do this job." The lawyer smiled faintly. "It wasn't me," he said. "It was truth. It just needed someone to listen." Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting for another high-profile trial. He walked past them quietly, unnoticed this time, and that was fine with him. Some victories don't need cameras. They just need peace. Weeks turned into months. The man who had once been accused began visiting schools, talking to students about truth, justice, and patience. He never told them his full story, only said, "Don't let lies destroy what you know is right. Sometimes the truth is quiet, but it's stronger than you think." People started inviting him to community talks. His words carried the weight of experience, not theory. Some cried hearing him speak. Others simply nodded, understanding that truth wasn't just about courts. It was about courage. One evening, he received a letter in the mail. It was from the witness, the one who had confessed. The handwriting was shaky. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter said, "but I needed to say I'm sorry again. I live with what I did every day. I hope you find peace even if I never do." He sat quietly for a long time, holding the letter. Then he folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. He didn't feel anger anymore, only sadness for how one lie had ruined so many lives. He went out to the porch, looked at the stars, and whispered, "I forgive you." The wind was calm that night, soft against his face. He closed his eyes, letting the silence speak. Years later, people still remembered that case, not just because it shocked the courtroom, but because it reminded them of something bigger, that truth may bend under fear, but it never breaks completely. The lawyer eventually moved on to teach law students. He often told them the story without using names. "There will be times," he said, "when everyone around you believes the lie. You'll be told to follow the easy path. But remember, when truth finally walks into the courtroom, the world stops to listen. And that's the moment you live for." The man lived quietly after that. He married, started a small business, and built a new life. Not perfect, but peaceful. Every morning he walked past the same courthouse that once held his fate. Sometimes he stopped and looked at it. He no longer felt fear, only gratitude. Because behind those walls, he had lost everything and found something greater. Proof that truth, no matter how late, always arrives. And though people eventually stopped talking about the case, he never forgot what it taught him. That silence can be broken, lies can crumble, and when truth hits the courtroom, everyone freezes. Years passed and life slowly returned to something that looked like normal. The world had moved on, the news had shifted to new headlines, and the courtroom that once held so much tension was now just another quiet building where other stories began and ended. But for those who lived through that trial, it never really faded. It stayed like a quiet shadow behind every new day, a reminder that truth is sometimes slow but never silent. The man who had once stood accused had built a life that finally felt peaceful. His days began early, with soft light spilling into the small kitchen where his wife made tea. His children ran around the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. Sometimes when he watched them play, he'd feel something tighten in his chest. Not pain, but deep gratitude. He often thought about how close he had come to losing everything. Just a few more lies, just a few more missed details, and his life could have ended behind bars. That thought alone made him treasure every morning. He worked hard, but he also learned to slow down. He noticed small things he used to ignore: the smell of rain, the sound of distant music, the feeling of sunlight on his face. Each one reminded him that freedom wasn't just about walking outside. It was about being able to feel, to breathe, to exist without fear. Sometimes people still recognized him. They'd whisper his name or approach him carefully as if not sure what to say. Some wanted to apologize for not believing him. Others just wanted to shake his hand. He always responded with a quiet smile. He didn't hold grudges. He had learned that carrying bitterness was like holding a stone in your heart, heavy and pointless. One afternoon, while closing his shop, he saw an older man standing by the door. It was the lawyer. Time had added lines to his face, but his eyes were the same, calm, steady, thoughtful. "I was in the neighborhood," the lawyer said, smiling. "Thought I'd drop by." They sat outside on a wooden bench, sharing tea as the sun began to set. For a while, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that didn't need words, comfortable and full of unspoken memories. After a moment, the man said, "I still remember that day in court. When you showed that video, everything stopped." The lawyer nodded slowly. "That's what truth does," he said. "It doesn't shout. It just arrives, and when it does, the world goes quiet." The man smiled faintly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found that footage?" The lawyer looked down, thoughtful. "Every day," he said. "Because for every case like yours, there are others where truth stays buried. It's what keeps me working, hoping to find one more truth before it's too late." They both went quiet again, listening to the soft sound of evening traffic. Before leaving, the lawyer stood and said, "You know, what happened to you taught more people than any law book could. You showed that patience and honesty still matter." The man shook his head. "I just survived," he said softly. "That's more than most people can do," the lawyer replied, smiling as he walked away. That night, the man couldn't sleep. He stepped out onto the porch, the cool air brushing against his face. The moon hung low in the sky, silver and calm. He looked up at it and whispered, "Thank you." Though he wasn't sure who he was thanking, maybe life itself. He thought about the witness who had confessed. He had never seen them again, but sometimes he wondered how they were living now, whether they found peace or if guilt still haunted them. Part of him wanted to know, but another part felt it was better not to. Some chapters, he had learned, were meant to end quietly. The next morning, he found a letter in his mailbox. It was from a law student who had heard his story. "I want to become a lawyer because of what happened to you." It read, "Not to win cases, but to find truth, no matter how hidden it is." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same drawer where he had once kept the witness's apology. Both letters were reminders, one of pain, the other of purpose. Over the years, he began to speak at community events more often. People would invite him to share his journey, not as a victim, but as a man who had seen both the worst and the best in people. He always began the same way. "I used to think truth was something people naturally cared about. But I learned that sometimes people are afraid of it, because truth doesn't protect lies, it exposes them." His words carried weight because they came from lived experience. He didn't try to sound wise. He spoke simply, honestly, and that made people listen. Sometimes after his talks, people came up to him, some with tears, others with quiet admiration. "Your story gives me hope," they'd say. "I'm fighting my own battle, and now I know I can keep going." He would smile and reply, "Truth doesn't need to rush. It just needs someone brave enough to stand for it." Meanwhile, the lawyer, now nearing retirement, often thought back to that trial as the turning point in his career. He had handled many cases after that, but none had felt as personal. He had seen how close the justice system could come to failing, and how one small piece of honesty could turn it all around. In his final lecture before retiring, he told his students, "When truth enters a courtroom, it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly like a whisper, but that whisper can silence lies that shout the loudest." He paused and looked at the class. "Don't chase fame. Don't chase money. Chase truth, because when truth stands tall, justice follows, even if it takes time." Years later, when he passed away peacefully in his sleep, the man attended the memorial. It was a small gathering, family, friends, and a few old clients. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped up to the microphone, his voice calm but emotional. "He saved my life," he said simply, "not just from prison but from losing faith in the world. He reminded me that even when the world turns its back on you, there are still people who'll stand for what's right." After the service, he stood outside, watching the evening sky change colors. He thought about how strange life was, how pain could lead to purpose, how loss could create strength, and how truth once revealed could ripple through time like a quiet wave that never really fades. When he went home that night, he sat with his children and told them the story, not the sad parts but the lessons. "No matter how hard life gets," he said, "never stop believing in what's right. Lies can win for a while, but truth always finds its way." His daughter looked up and asked softly, "Even if it takes long?" He smiled and nodded. "Especially then." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing gently against the window. It was the same kind of night that had once felt heavy with fear, but now it felt calm, like a full circle closing quietly.